Ask a friend if he knows anyone who had access to some tools I needed to finish a project. Sure, he knows a guy from work that would be happy to help. Apparently he was interested in the same kind of art, but warns me he's a bit off. Drive friend to work one day, he introduces me. Seems really distant and withdrawn, shakes my hand, and we chat a bit. He seems real interested in the wood work I was doing, and we talked about sculptures and such for a little while. Things we'd learned, tools we used, etc. Guy warms up a bit and I ask him if he would be alright if I checked out some of his stuff. He hesitantly agrees, kind of like when you're trying to come up with an excuse but just can't. He tells me to swing by the night, we can chat over a few beers. Okay, sure. Later that night I get a call. It's a guy. He sounds a little shaken up, says things chaotic at home, and right now isn't a good time. Says he'll call me some other time. Whatever, sure. 2 weeks go by. Guy calls one afternoon, says things have settled down, and he wants me to bring over some of my work as well. Compare and blah 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 blah. Sure dude. So I start to head over, and notice this guy lives in the middle of nowhere. I had to call him up just to find his house. It's the end of a long driveway, beautiful acres of land. The driveway is littered with trees, and his house is actually pretty nice. As I come up the driveway, something strikes me as odd about the trees I'm passing. They all have faces carved into them facing the driveway. Twisted painted faces. I didn't think much of it, but I mean, I make morbid stuff myself, and in fact I was very impressed. The amount of detail was staggering. Looking out onto the tree line of the property, every tree had painted face looking in on the house, almost like the woods were watching you wherever you were. This actually kind of creeped me out. Looking out was like seeing 100 or so white faces just crying out, kind of like they wanted your attention. Knock on the door, guy answers with a beer in hand. In a much friendlier demeanor than before, helps me carry some of my stuff in, and he shows me around. Guy seems pretty cool. Begin to notice each room has one of those same damned faces hanging above the doorframe. The more I saw them, the more I felt sick. Up close, the faces were detailed than I had imagined, almost surrealistic. I asked him what his focus on the faces were for, and the guy kind of tensed up and dodged my question. Upon entering his workshop, which was sweet by the way, he seemed to have other interests besides creepy faces. Entire 7-foot sculptures of women, men, animals, etc. All very well done. And one with a tarp in the back, just chilling there. He says it isn't done yet, so don't bother. It was right in front of a door that I think led to another room. We began working on stuff together, trading stories, and in times we had accidentally injured ourselves. Suddenly, subjects changed. Guy asked me what I think about God. Tell him I'm not very religious, but I don't really think out. Guy starts getting a bit loud, saying that God is a blatant lie. He was told so. By who? He kind of silenced for a moment, and then abruptly asked if I believe in spirits. Gave him kind of the same answer. It's possible. He starts looking around the room as if seeing if anyone is around, and then his voice goes soft, and he kind of whispers for a moment. I see things in the woods. At dusk I can see their shadows. Sometimes they whisper from the trees, and I can hear them. Egg him on. Ask him what they tell him, but they tell him that God is a light and the only thing after death is darkness. He says they laugh at him and leave dead animals at his tree line. Officially creeped out at this point. He said for a while they visited him at night, and each face carving represented a different spirit that had visited him. He says that they can't stand looking at themselves in death, so they don't step within the tree line, thus why he had the entire thing carved out. I'm pretty silent at this point. I hadn't had goosebumps so bad since I was a kid, and chills just running up my spine. He told me they talked to him from the tree line at night and tried to get him to leave his home. I eagerly try to change the subject. Guy looks down and just keeps talking. He's pale as a sheet. He was obviously generally terrified. He even kind of looks like he was welling up. Tells me I'm the only person he's told, knowing I'm a stranger. He apologizes, says he's scared and doesn't know what to do anymore. I try my best to awkwardly console the stranger, and the guy actually kind of starts to break down. I think he needs help, but it's not my place to give it to him. Regrettably ask him why he's afraid. Says the faces don't work anymore, and 2 weeks ago he had something terrible in his living room. Huh? He walks over to the tarp sculpture and pulls the tarp off. To her, the most mangled, terrible thing I've ever seen. It hardly resembled a human being. It was terrifying to have imagined this guy seeing it standing in his living room. Shortly after, a loud bang on the wall to my right nearly jumped out my skin. This guy didn't even flinch. Then again, bang. And it just continued on and on, continuously like hail hitting the tin roof. The guy screams, "Stop it!" and it ceases. After that, I grabbed my crap, tell the guy I'm sorry, and got out of there as quickly as possible. As I'm leaving his home and driveway, I look into the rearview mirror. The tree line is darker than I've ever seen. Guy calls a week later and apologizes, says he was silly and everything's okay now. Friend says guy quit, and I never heard from him again. Be me. In 2015, sleeping as one does, I have a dream about a Native American man named Maxie. I've never met anyone by that name or description. Think nothing of it, but remember that dream vividly. Years later, visit my aunt. Grandmother lives with her, early stages of dementia, sometimes lucid, sometimes not. Sitting with grandmother, vibing. She's watching game shows as she always does. Petting the orange cat she's had for us as long as I can remember. She mutes the TV. Asks me if she's ever told me about my mom's first husband. Unaware that my mom was married before, ask her to tell me since she brought it up. She tells me about how my mom married a Native American boy in the early 90s. Cool, didn't know that. Aunt comes into the room. Grandmother asks what the boy's name was. I don't remember. What? Goes on to tell me that they weren't married for long and divorced after a year. She married my dad later on. Grandmother tells me that she doesn't think my dad is my real dad. Aunt tells her to stop being crazy. Weird. A week later, I'm back at home. Aunt calls me in tears. Tells me that after the divorce, my mom kept sleeping with her ex, even while married to my dad. Goes on to say that this mystery guy is my real dad. Don't believe it at first, but then starts to make sense. It explains why I don't look like anyone else in my family. Asks if she remembered his name just to make sure. Maxie. She also tells me he died in 2015. The man that might be my biological father visited me in my dreams the same year he died. A friend of my dad's would babysit me sometimes when I was little. Mom wasn't in the picture, and he used to tell a story to me that scares the heck out of me to this day. Dad's friend, I'll call him Bob, is driving a rig out in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. Has to make the delivery by the following morning, so he decides to just drive through the night. It's like 1 in the morning, no one else is out on the roads. Hasn't seen another car in probably 100 miles. He's literally in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly the whole entire sky lights up. Instantly, like daylight. Bob slams on the brakes, has no idea what the hell is going on. Everything stays lit up for a good solid 10 seconds. He can see everything. Whatever is happening is not lightning, it doesn't stop or flicker at all. Bob hunkers down, anticipating imminent nuclear devastation. Suddenly the sky goes dark again. No sound, no blast wave. He sits there in the middle of the road waiting for almost 5 minutes, then decides to keep going. Figures it was a meteor or something. Goes about 2 miles up the road and sees a car with its flashers on stopped in the middle of the road. Stops a good distance away from it. There's not enough room to go around it. Front end of the car is crumpled like it hit something. Bob figures they probably hit a deer that got spooked whenever the meteor went over and ran into the road. He gets out of the cab and goes to see if the driver is okay. The driver is sitting on the ground by the driver's side door. Has his knees up and is resting his head on his arms. Hey buddy, you okay? Bob calls out. He stops about 10 feet away for seemingly no reason. Something about the whole situation feels weird. Bob is one of those guys that always listens to his gut, so he stays put. God, my head is killing me, the guy says, but he doesn't lift his head up, so it's muffled. Did you hit a deer? Bob asks. He's getting more and more uneasy. Something's wrong. But he still can't figure out what exactly it is. The guy says he thinks he might have hurt his head. Asks Bob to please help him. Bob takes a step forward, but his instincts are going ape. He looks at everything again. That's when he notices it. The car is all wrong. It looks like what someone thinks a car looks like. It has all the right pieces, but there's nothing extra, if that makes sense. Bob says it looked like a cheap Hot Wheels knockoff. It just looked very wonky and wrong. He looks around at the back of the car and realizes that not only is there no license plate, there's not even a trunk. It's just one solid piece of material with the tail lights put in it. There's no manufacturer or model names. Bob knows cars, and this thing is nothing he's ever seen before. From where he's standing, he can see there's no tailpipe or even hubcaps. It's just the shape of a car. He starts to back up, and the guy asks him for help again. Bob tells him he can't help him, and that he'll call a tow truck when he gets to the next town. The guy lifts his head and looks at Bob. Tells him he thinks he might have a concussion. Something is really wrong with this guy's face, but again, it takes a second for Bob to figure it out. The next part is exactly how Bob described it. Everything on the man's face was where it should have been, in their normal positions. He looked totally normal, except for the fact that his eyes and mouth were upside down. Bob springs back to his rig. Climbs in, locks the door just in time for the man to slam into the door behind him. How did he get there so fast? He knocks on the glass and smells at Bob, but because his mouth is upside down, it looks like he's screaming. Tells Bob to open the door so he can come in. Bob floors it. Doesn't care if he hits the guy or not. His truck easily pushes the quote-unquote car out of the way. Whatever it is, it's light and makes no sound when he hits it. Unfortunately, it's an anticlimactic ending. Bob got where he was going fine with no other problems. My dad knows this story, but I don't think he believes it, but Bob tells it to everyone he meets, so obviously he does. He's absolutely adamant about the guy being an alien. Years later, I heard about the Thatcher effect, and I nearly had a heart attack when I saw it. I showed one of the pictures to Bob, and he wouldn't even look at it. He says it's exactly what the guy looked like. Pick very much related. Okay X, I've been wanting to tell you this for a while. For some background, I work in a petrol station located on the highway. Mostly night shifts, 3 PM to midnight, so I'm used to the weird, the creepy, and the downright paranormal. But this? Normal shift, people coming and going. It's about 7, things are dark and the store is slowing down a bit. Behind console area, look to my left and lock eyes. Not that I could, mind you. With a woman? Question mark. Frail, thin, elderly, with wrinkled skin and a giant fly-eyed sunglasses on that cover half her face. Immediately get the jitters from her. She walks slowly to the door. I had to manually make it open to let her in as the auto doors didn't pick her up. Makes her way to the console, stares at me. Can't tell, still wearing those creepy sunnies.
Can you come outside and take a look at my car? I think something is wrong with it.
Her voice is soft in volume, but deep and resonating, like I felt it more than I heard it. Decline. Explain policy with leaving as only staff on site.
Okay then.
She walks off to the toilet. Now here is where alarm bells start going off. Serving other customers, stragglers here and there. She comes out of the bathroom after 5 minutes, walks over to me again, and says,
There's no toilet paper. Could you come and get me some?
Alarm bells. Something in my head says not to go out there. Get some toilet paper from behind the console. Here you go, ma'am. Her demeanor is sour, or as far as I can tell with those sunnies.
Okay.
She walks back into the toilet. About another 5 minutes she walks back out and wanders around the shop. I watched her and noticed she flicks her head in my direction every now and then, like scanning me. She walks back to the coffee machine, then calls out to me. Her voice is louder this time, but it feels like a knife this time, shrill and freezing.
There's no milk in here. Can you replace it? I'd like some coffee.
I know I should do it, but something is up alarm in my body and brain was screaming not to. Decline said I can't leave the console at this hour of the night. She gets visibly annoyed, saying how my customer service is. She threatens to contact my manager if I don't come out and change the milk. Decline and apologize, even off my manager's number. She tries 3 more times to get me out over the next 20 minutes. Finally gives up and walks off, glaring at me through the windows as she rounds the shop out of sight. The rest of shift goes by without a hitch. No creepy things, surprisingly mellow and normal shift. Still have a sense of dread in my stomach. Swap over and leave at 12:30 a.m. Walk to my car about 50 meters in the parking lot. As I get closer, glasses, scarf, and gloves she was wearing around folded neatly. The glasses resting on top, in a pile on the ground by my driver's side door. Look around, sense of dread intensifying. Quick as a flash, I unlock my car, jump in, and lock it again. No time to relax, start the car, and gun it out of there. Never been so fearful in my life. Dread never left. I got home and needed a few drinks before I could even loosen up enough to even consider sleep. I used to work in the gas industry as a geologist. From 2007 to 2009, I was on a contract with a Russian company called North Gas, back when industrial relations with the UK were still fairly cordial. There were lots of potential gas sites in the Serbian region far up north, and I used to go around potential sites with company borehole engineers, usually in groups of 2 to 3. Anyway, I was at one site in the northern Siberia with a German engineer in late October of 2008. It took ages to get to and completely devoid of human habitation, but really beautiful taiga. Endless forests on the drive up there. Someone asked, you drove a van through taiga? Yeah, I'm not a car nut, but it was some modified Jeep that the engineer guy would just notch about, all the way from Novosibirsk. Anyway, the site we went to survey was fairly typical of what you'd expect in the industry at these sorts of locations. Thin topsoil given way to permeable siltstone, excellent locations for surveying. Now to the story. We came to a location where satellite imagery was suggesting that permafrost was retreating. It still snows and ices over, of course, but the key point is that it's not entirely frozen over. You can install stuff during the summer months, get gas production up. It was a pretty boring landscape though, very thin topsoil giving way rapidly to permeable siltstone. Lots of these natural holes all over the place too, permafrost plugs that had melted and left 20 to 30 meter deep holes dotted all over the place. We decided to stay a few weeks and do some test surveys. The first week was completely fine, got some good locations, things progressing smoothly. By the end of that week though, things were getting a little weird. Every time I would go out with a spectrometer after that first week, I'd occasionally hear some noises from the holes. I was never near them because while you get a lot of gas coming off of these things, they're not terribly good for industrial drilling. It was faint, just on the border of hearing. Until a few years later when someone took me out to a jazz bar and some guy was playing a violin-like instrument that made this drone noise. Like a disconcerting, makes your hair stand up. My colleague would know this too. Disconcerting, as in this job. You're not really working together but apart. So 2 of us were hearing stuff out there. We were both rational people, at the time for me at least. So we put it down to cave noises. Laugh, forget about it. About 10 days into the survey, it started happening at night. Again, faint but really ominous, that drone noise. We used to sleep in the back of the van we brought, but even through those doors we heard it. Again, stop being stupid, it's cave noises, laugh, have a few beers, go to sleep. It got worse from here. The day after, I found some slime stuff around one of those permafrost boreholes. Yeah, you get lichens and mosses around these things, not an issue, but this was like petroleum jelly, that really viscous stuff. I touched it and immediately regretted it. It felt a lot like pork belly fat. It was warm too, which was really disturbing considering it was -5 Celsius for you American fags during the day out there. Bringing around the German engineer to take a look, he looks trouble. For the rest of the day, I was constantly on edge too. I kept looking back at the porthole too, just to check. I kept saying to myself, things got worse at night. That drone noise got a lot worse, but it felt, and I know that's a way of saying it, like it wasn't from below, but above, on the surface. My German engineer tried to laugh it off, but I could tell he was seriously disturbed by it. Just that low phone. Eventually, we get to sleep. God knows how many hours later though, we wake up together because there is definitely something attempting to open the door handle to the passenger seat of the van. Click, click, click. And now that drone is right outside, and it sounds a lot like gurgling. At this point we both freak out and scream like a pair of little girls. It stops, we don't sleep the rest of the night, and it doesn't come back. Next day, as soon as we make it to 9 a.m, we cautiously open the doors. The entire back door is covered in this pork fat. The place reeks of something rotten too. Passenger door just smeared in that stuff, but the thing that made us immediately go, we're leaving, was that the passenger window, which was also smeared in this gunk, had an outline on it, like something had pressed its skull into the fat stuff and left an outline. It was unmistakable, some elongated human skull with no eye orbitals. Jelly stuff was all over the area around us too, and of course, we'd all the way back to that borehole. We got out of there very fast, but as we were packing, that drone started again from that hole, and it was loud. It was guttural by this point. Whatever it was making it was down there and close too. German guy went pretty nuts after that, just hopped in, immediately started going. Equipment that was still out for methane measurements just to the left. Didn't stop driving for the next 14 hours. I pretty much ditched my job soon after. I had no desire to be left like that again in the middle of places like that. German guy, never heard from him again. He never talked about it to me anyway. Be Grandpa. Sometime around the 1940s, I think. Deep south, wild country bumpkins as far as I can see. There's a huge tree just north of Grandpa's hometown. A local legend claims the tree is haunted by a large man on a black horse. People have been said to make pacts with it. Others leave little offerings, hoping to gain favor from the tall man. Grandpa decides to make a deal with the evil spirit one day. I'm not going to go into detail, but Grandpa was an orphan and his life was really rough. So Grandpa goes to the tree. A man on a horse steps out of it, almost like the tree was a liquid instead of a solid. The man is huge and his face looks all puffy and blue like when someone drowns. Grandpa tells his story to the man. How he's starving and he can't find work and has no money. How he's lonely and he wishes he had a family of his own. So the man on the horse tells Grandpa to travel to a neighboring town. He will meet a woman there with lots of money. They will fall in love and get married, and with her money they'll be able to buy a farm. The farm will earn them a decent living and it will stay in the family. But that two of his sons will leave for the city and go on to become educated men. Grandpa will live to see them prosper and become important people, but there's one thing he needs to do. There's a cave outside of town that belongs to the man on the horse. Grandpa needs to stop there on his way to the next town. He needs to write his name on the cave wall in his own blood. Then everything will happen just like the man on the horse said. Grandpa thanks him and leaves for the neighboring town. On the way, he finds the cave the man told him about. He goes inside and finds the walls covered in names written in blood. Grandpa pricks his finger and signs the wall as well. Then he leaves. Long story short, Grandpa met my grandmother, whose family was really wealthy. She and Grandpa bought a farm, made a good deal of money, and raised my dad and his brothers. Several years before I was born, Grandpa woke up to find the man on the horse standing by his bed. The man told Grandpa that he would soon be a grandfather and that his grandsons would prosper, just like he had promised. But in the 25th year of his life, the youngest boy will be mine. Then he slowly faded away. I'm the youngest of my dad's sons, by the way. Grandpa used to tell me this story and chuckle. He'd say there was nothing to worry about. He'd remind me that the name he signed on the cave wall wasn't his real name. After he'd been orphaned, one of the families in his hometown took him in for a bit. The name they'd give him was the name he'd written on the wall. So I'm sure you have nothing to worry about. So he said. Then he'd pretend confused and ask, "How old are you now?" I'd tell him and he'd nod very dramatically and say, "Yes, I'm sure you'll be fine." I know this was just a bedtime story my grandpa made up to scare me, but man, could the old man spin a yarn. I'm 25 now, and it still kinda spooks me to imagine that he was telling the truth. I'll see if I can dig up some photos of the time I visited his farm and hometown. I don't have a scanner, so bad quality, but this enormous tree near my grandpa's farm is the exact same type of tree from his story, according to him. Terrible perspective because I was 13 when I took this and being an artsy guy, but it was much taller than a house and you couldn't even wrap your arm halfway around the trunk. One more just to give you a sense of how rustic the area is. Here's a short tunnel that we took between the farm and the town over. Grandpa said this thing was there when he was a kid. Something awful and scary happened to me, X, last year. I greentexted this event earlier today on X in a Skinwalker thread, but I lost it. It is long, but real, and still makes me feel a little queasy. What do you think? Live in rural North Nevada. Them there's gold in them hills, boys. No, but really, it sucks. Hanging with 3 bros, drinking at the house. Call up some friends, it's a desert party time. Driving to nowhere on a dirt road, so we can shoot targets and crap and listen to obnoxiously loud music. 30 miles of driving, completely dark, barren desert. The dirt road ends at no significant location. Wow, that's weird. A bunch of other guys met us there. There were some hot girls too. We set up tables and chairs, get the bumpiest car stereo going. Everyone was drinking and firing rifles into the hills. Crap is so cash. The girls hate guns and are generally worthless. Some half a dozen weed-smoking members of our cohort nip off to smoke a blunt. We need to get to the top of the tallest nearby hill to acquire the best smoking spot. Get to the top, the hill overlooks a valley, and on the side opposite to us. Holy crap. There is an older structure in the distance, maybe half a mile. It looks like a farmhouse. It's exploring time, son. Gather everyone. This is going to be so awesome. It is still early evening, still light out. As the entourage gets closer to the farmhouse, it becomes clear that it is really spooky skeletons. The females are too scared to enter the unholy basilka because of the front door. Pick related. Jesus Christ. It is a 1940s era 2-story very fancy farmhouse. Everything is thrown all over the place. It is absolutely covered in rat crap and decades of undisturbed dust. However, what is disturbing is that everything is still there. Pillows, blankets, chandeliers, books, furniture, pictures, paintings. Even an old film reel projector and screen. These people were obviously very wealthy, but in 70 years, the property has been pillaged, but none of this crap was stolen, sold at an auction, destroyed, retrieved by friends or relatives. The antique cars sit rusting in the ground out front with all their parts still on. Old school mint green refrigerator with door open, desiccated, moldified ancient food remains. No, this is not right at all. How did this happen? Start to get creeped out. Wardrobes filled with World War II era looking clothing. I do not know the significance of the farmhouse with a story. The thing is, I felt like the farmhouse was a very bad place for reasons I do not really understand. I mean, nothing bad happened at the farmhouse. It was just a little odd, but absurd crap went down that night, and it started with the farmhouse. I went from drinking beers and having a good time to freaking out. The sun was starting to go down, so we needed to get back to the party camp. BBQ time, whipping burgers and steaks up on the grill. Oh my god, that crap was delicious. My friend Dan has lived down the street from me our whole lives essentially. We have known each other since elementary school. Dan is fat but funny, so it's tolerable. He comes up to me and quietly says that he wants to go home. I try to get him to tell me what's up, but he doesn't give me a straight answer. I am sure he was right spooked by the farmhouse like I was. Today was a good day after all. Brought lots of cut wood. Bro 2 and I get the bonfire going. The light of the bonfire illuminates someone walking towards us in the desert. They aren't even walking along the direction of the road. Everyone essentially craps their pants, turning the music off and scrambling thinking it was an axe murderer or even a worse, cop. It is just a dude in a hoodie, walking in the middle of the pitch black desert. Somewhat drunk and confused, in light of the strange circumstances, we are relieved that it's just some relatively friendly guy about our age, maybe no older than 20. We tell him he scared the crap out of us and asked him what he was doing here.
Hiking.
Hiking?
Do you know how creepy that is?
Someone says, referencing the fact that he was walking around randomly in the deserted plains in the dark by himself.
Yeah, he's the creepster.
We made several jokes calling him the creepster, but he seemed like a quiet but good-natured fellow and laughed with us. We asked him to hang out with us and got him a beer. He had sort of a strange mannerisms, like a drug burnout and a scar in his mouth like a cleft lip scar or something. I'm so stupid. The whole time, the hoodie guy is acting in a strange way, like he is waiting at the DMV or sitting at a dentist's office or something. I don't know how else to describe it. I remember thinking he is probably just awkward, but it starts to sink in for me maybe 20 minutes later that something incredibly wrong is going on. I start to feel panicked. I start to pack up my crap in a way, past midnight and some people already have left. I tell Bro 2 that we are about to oust this joint and that we should smoke before we hit the road. I tell him to get Dan because he's always down to smoke. Dan is completely missing. Where is Dan? We ask everyone. We ask them when they last saw him. We walk around the area with flashlights, thinking he had to call his mom or pissed his pants or he was taking a crap out in the desert. We blow up his phone with calls and text messages to no response. Bro 2 and I drive around honking with the brights on, trying to locate him. We have been looking for him for like 45 minutes. Dan is gone. We hope, we pray, that Dan was serious about going home and got a ride with one of the guys who left earlier.
Now you really need to leave right now. We can drop by his house to see if he's there.
For some reason, everyone assumes that we will take care of Hoodie Guy. They get in their cars and say goodbye. I am the driver and I would feel like an a-hole leaving Hoodie Guy out in the desert. How would he get home? How did he get out here? How did he get out here? I offer to give him a ride. I am actually sweating on the trip home. Bro number 2 in the passenger seat, ask him where he lives. He gives us a verbal directions to a street called Calle de la Plata. My stomach drops instantly. That is the street where both Dan and I live. Bro number 2 is short distance away. Holy crap. We say nothing. There is no, oh wow, we live there too, or how long have you lived there? The rest of the ride is silence. We bring him to the major intersection just a block away from where Dan lives. We drop him off there and he thanks us. We go to Dan's house. His mom, but no Dan. Not wanting to worry her, we don't tell her or call the cops or anything. He must have gone off to party with some other group. I called Dan in the morning. I think it was one of the most emotional conversations I've ever had in my life. I was literally in tears. I don't know why. It wasn't sadness. Dan's story is as follows. He watched us leave the party last night. He said goodbye to us. He says that we left abruptly with the Hoodie Guy.
Dan, where were you last night? We were gone for at least 2 hours.
We spent almost one of those 2 hours looking in the desert for you. I was there the whole time.
No, you weren't. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. Did you go to take a crap for 2 hours somewhere? I was there the whole time.
Completely without words, I spent a lot of time just sitting in a chair thinking over what happened. Then I get a call from bro number 2, who has a much worse story. We go over to see Brent. Brent was one of the guys who was at the party camp. He brought the chicks. The chicks were over there too when we went to see him. They say we never looked for Dan. They say that Dan was never missing. He was there the whole time, and we left before he did. They say that we arrived with the Hoodie Guy, that he was with us in our car when we got there. I try to calm down and explain to them that that is impossible. We arrived with Dan.
Why did you call him the creepster then?
I ask her.
I don't know, he was just really quiet and had that weird scar. No, you saw him walk out of the desert. He walked out of the pitch black darkness. You were there.
Bro number 2 and I are yelling at the top of our lungs. They don't seem to understand what we are upset about. They keep telling us to calm down. They do not remember how strange it was that he was in the middle of the desert.
He came with you.
They would say. Dan does not really ever hang out with us anymore. He was always a fun guy to be around. His mom says he is going through some personal struggles. But since March 2012, he doesn't really even talk to me or bro number 2. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Dan when he was gone for 2 hours. Sometimes I wonder if the Hoodie Guy was even a human being.